Accutron Watches present The Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture, with your hosts David Graver and Indrani. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
I'm all for augmented intelligence. I think there are a lot of things that machines do better than we will ever do. But there are a lot of things that we do better than any machine we can ever conceive of. And the idea of trying to replicate the human brain seems odd to me.
The person you heard at the top of the show is today's guest, David Ewing Duncan, award-winning journalist and author of The Voyage of Sorcerer 2. He's here to talk about this new book. But first up, me, David Graver, my co-host Indrani, here on a new episode of The Accutron Show. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, AccutronWatch.com, and discover our iconic SpaceView 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open-dial design, combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed. Again. The Accutron SpaceView 2020.
Indrani, I'm so happy to be back here with you for another episode of The Accutron Show with a guest that's very dear to you.
I'm so excited about the work that David Ewing Duncan is doing. What bridges AI, robots, and microbiome? How do you bring these things together in one place? And that's what he's been exploring.
It's his intellect. It's his will to tell these stories, to tell science in a way that can perhaps influence people to change the world. You spent time with David during New York Climate Week. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about what your participation was like.
Climate Week was extraordinary, seeing so many brilliant people coming together to attack these issues from different perspectives. And I was fortunate to be a co-convener of the Science Summit at the United Nations, held at the Harvard Club, with the support of Accutron. And it was really exciting to hear David and many other thinkers, scientists, indigenous knowledge keepers, looking at these questions from their different perspectives and coming together.
I'd be curious to know if David is optimistic about the future, but I'm also, while we're here, are you optimistic about the future?
I am very optimistic.
Why?
I just believe that if we put all of our attention into solving these challenges, there's nothing that humanity cannot do. And we've done incredible things so far. So this is a problem we've created, and I truly believe that we have the capacity to solve it as long as we combine our willpower.
Something that I think is really fascinating about David, we're all familiar with climate change. It is on the tip of everyone's tongue. We're all aware of what is looming. But David is approaching it in his new book through the idea of the oceanic microbiome, which is not words we normally hear together. So I was very excited to learn about his take and his scientific experience going down this path.
I think there's a spiritual side to this idea of a microbiome. Spending time with indigenous people, talking about the way that there's life in the entire universe, it's all interconnected. And now scientists are starting to find that that's actually can be seen through their studies as well.
I think David also aligns a lot with our mission. We're both writers, filmmakers, documentarians. We're all trying to convey stories. And he's on a mission to do that. And he's written for Vanity Fair. He's hosted television programs. He's really on the cusp of media and using media to make the world better.
It's fascinating to have 12 books and at the same time constantly be pushing the envelope of exploring areas that we don't really think about in our daily life.
Well, I'm excited to learn, and I'm excited to learn with you. And I hope maybe we can elicit some change. I hope people pay attention, and climate change is among us. It's a part of our consideration, and it will be even more so for our children and our grandchildren. So David has the ability to sort of spread the word.
I think that we are all pioneers in a very new world, and having the courage to understand what that world is about, I think is really, really inspiring.
I must say, my microbiome, I think it's kind of in order. And what about yours?
Oh, well, I've been traveling a lot, so my microbiome is very diverse.
Well, it's very nice to see you. It's very nice that we're both in New York City together. And stay tuned for this episode of The Accutron Show.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Welcome back to an episode of The Accutron Show with today's guest, best-selling novelist, best-selling author, and award-winning journalist, David Ewing Duncan. David, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's so exciting, David, seeing all of your work and the different ways that you bring together science and history and humanity and climate action, which is so dear to our hearts here. Being here in Climate Week in New York, celebrating and actuating how we can create the change. What are your thoughts this year? Do you feel something changing?
Well, it's interesting. This is the first time I've actually been here for Climate Week, although I've thought about this and covered it even, from when I was a child, because my mother was an environmentalist. And so I grew up with this. But, I think I go through what everybody does. There's a certain anxiety. It's an existential moment for our species and our planet and this ecosystem that we depend on. But I am feeling a lot of really positive energy here in New York. And obviously, there are a lot of people here, want to help. But I was at a meeting a couple of days ago with young people for UNICEF. And they were reporting that younger people surveyed around the world are feeling eco-anxious, like a lot of them, almost 80%. But they're also feeling eco-optimistic. Amazing. So what is going on with that? That dichotomy, I think, really captures this moment.
Climate change is on the tip of everyone's tongue. It's in everyone's mind right now. But through your new book, I received my first introduction to this idea of the ocean's microbiome. Can you tell me how you went down this path and how this became such an area of concern?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, when they say the word microbiome, everybody goes, either what's that or that
your
sounds kind of boring, right? It's in your stomach. Yes. Well, actually, we can use that analogy. So the book is about this invisible world that connects all life on our planet. And very few people even know it really exists. And there are more microbes than stars in the universe. I mean, it's such a huge number. In fact, they are the masters of our planet. I mean, we are just one, small species compared to this. And they've been around for billions of years. They terraformed our planet. That's why there's oxygen in the atmosphere. And what we are managing to do with our mere 8 billion humans, which is a tiny little number compared to the vastness of the microbiome, we are managing to change the microbiome in a matter of a few decades. And in fact, to use the stomach analogy, a lot of people know you have a microbiome in your gut, and it actually helps you digest food. It does a lot of things that are really good for you. And in fact, you wouldn't survive very long without them. But if you sit and eat junk food week after week, you change your microbiome. I mean, you do a lot of bad things to your body, but one of the things you do is you actually change the good bacteria to bad bacteria, meaning it then does damage to you, and it can affect lots of systems in your body. So think about that with this vast environmental microbiome. We are feeding it junk food like carbon and phosphates and other chemicals, all the pollutants that we put. And the book is mostly about the ocean because I have a co-author named Craig Venter, who's a major scientist. And he spent years scouring the world looking for microbes, and he kind of rewrote what we know about the microbiome. But you imagine this microbiome can exist in all kinds of different climates. It can literally exist in volcanic vents, in glaciers. I mean, it can adapt. It'll be fine. But the ecosystem that supports us may not be. If we change the microbiome, we turn it from good bacteria and other microbes into bad.
It's really fascinating, and it's so exciting to celebrate the launch of your book. How is that for you as a writer? Oh,
it's fun. I mean, I've written other books, and it's always I mean, when you're in the middle of a book or a film or something like that, you wonder if you're ever going to finish. And it's just, I mean, you love it and you love that you have the opportunity to do it. But wow, it's just so much work. And I always, it's a gigantic, it's like a double, triple marathon. But when you actually finish and you cross that finish line, you do have to savor it. And I used to be the type of, kind of high energy person, like I'm on to the next project. But I've kind of, trained myself to take a moment, and that's kind of what I'm in right now.
With this book, I mean, the core of it is science, and it's about protecting the future of our planet. However, you infuse it with not a sense of adventure, but with storytelling to help convey your mission. How do you bring science and storytelling together?
Well, that's the essence of how we communicate. I mean, scientists communicate a little bit differently because it's about data. It's about, the scientific method, which is kind of a story. You have a hypothesis and then you experiment and then you come up with a conclusion. But they speak a little bit different language, but you can connect them up. And, I'm not a scientist by training, and, but I've spent a lot of time with scientists. And I don't know, I first choose scientists who can tell stories. So that's the easy way to do it. But I don't know, I love interpreting things, and no matter what it was. I mean, I've been a political reporter, I was an adventure travel reporter, so kind of interpreting what I was seeing around the world. And it's exciting to me to learn it. And I'm the guy that never shuts up about telling stories about this and that. And I've known Indrani for a while. She probably has picked up on that. Although, Indrani, you love to do that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So translating this in these very important stories like the one I was just describing and many others, I mean, genetic engineering, all of these, the ethics of it, the science of it. I mean, these are some of the most important stories, in the world. And most writers don't take time to really delve into it. And I was educated by some of the great scientists because, I was working for outlets that allowed me, ABC News or Vanity Fair, whatever. I could get in to talk to these people, and they would sit there and go, okay, I'm going to take a minute here, turn off your audio device, and I'm going to teach you genetics. And so I had some of the most famous geneticists in the world sit down with a whiteboard and show me. So anyway, but the point is that they were telling me the stories and they were translating it for me. And so I'm kind of the conduit for that. And I love it. And, hopefully anyway, bring some poetry to this because it's extraordinary. It's art, what these people are doing. They don't think of it that way oftentimes. But so it's all about stories.
I love that description, and translate seems to be a really such a useful word in this context because I think so often these different kinds of knowledge, people speak different languages and they don't communicate. So it was really fun having you at the Science Summit at the United Nations and bringing together different kinds of storytellers and with indigenous stories and Carlos Nobre, the Nobel Prize winner. And it was really interesting to see how your research and your work kind of ties all of these areas together. And what were your thoughts about how we can progress as a society if we can find a way to translate or to collaborate in a more in-depth kind of way?
Well, this is a crucial question. I mean, in fact, being here at Climate Week and being immersed in the science and talking to people on all ends of the spectrum of how you would answer that, from pessimist to optimist. The good news is about climate change, we know how to fix it. This is not, as they say, rocket science, although that may be part of the solution to it. But so, we know that solar, wind, we have renewable energies. The key thing right now, and by the way, I didn't really explain the microbiome of the oceans especially. We're drowning them in carbon right now. And the microbiome, there's something called phytoplankton. You probably heard of that plankton. So they live on the surface of the oceans, all over the oceans. And they're bacteria, they're algae, but they're all microscopic. They produce 60 to 80% of the oxygen that we breathe in the atmosphere. In fact, we have an oxygen atmosphere on Earth because they terraformed the planet, billions of years ago. And we are drowning them in carbon. They eat carbon, and actually they sequester about 30% of the carbon. But we're changing that balance, and we're actually beginning to slowly kill them off. And it's not a big deal yet, but it's getting there, and it's moving rapidly. Also, the ocean currents that are affected by the warming of the oceans, they bring the nutrients up from the bottom of the sea to feed, like this is called a carbon marine pump, or just the marine pump. This is a planetary system that we are, messing up because we're messing with the currents, and there are areas of the ocean now where this cycle is beginning to break down. So you asked me, though, about solutions, but I just wanted to kind of lay that out there. But again, we know how to fix this. I mean, and we've got, if I didn't think it before, after I did this book, we've got to stop spewing carbon in the atmosphere. And we're all complicit in this. We all, even those of us that are, really wanting to fix it, because that's how we live. That's how our civilization operates right now. And we are slowly moving the dial, but it's too slow. I mean, it's really, really almost a desperate situation.
When my biome is a mess, I can take a probiotic. If you could give a call to action, spewing carbon is something that a society does, but if you could give a call to action to one person out there that they could tell a friend to do, how would you encourage them to step up and participate?
Well, honestly, we all just need to do the small things. Again, we know this. This is, my kids, when they were small and they had their, kind of environmental day, where they learned about carbon, they came home and unplugged everything in the house. And I had to break it to them that plugging it back in actually takes more power than leaving it on. But it was hard to convince them of that because they were told to, and they became eco warriors, And that may seem tiny, but gestures like that, electric cars are going to be super helpful, although basically 8 billion people on the planet, and what we need to maintain even a basic civilization, it's going to take, there's always going to be trade-offs. Right now, the trade-offs are unacceptable. So we will still, but driving electric cars are better than driving combustion engines, although they do produce, carbon because there are, the electricity has to come from somewhere. And also there's an issue with the batteries and the waste and all of that. But, let's do one thing at a time. So buy an electric car, think about, I still in my house go around and turn off all the lights all the time. It's kind of simple. But, again, we kind of know how to do it. If everybody did that, it would help.
I'd love to know your thoughts on the bigger macro changes, because I actually believe that we can do much better than that. We can make systemic changes in the way we source our energy, in the way our things are managed. But that's we'll save that for another conversation.
Well, no, we can. I was answering individuals, but one thing we need to do. There's a philosophical answer to that too. We need to kind of get over this, some of this lifestyle that we lead. Jetting around in planes that, spew carbon, all of that. We got to figure out, and that's where technology comes in. It's not that, I love the modern world, but, I think we all need to kind of think this out collectively. And we happen to be, I'm a historian, as I said, and the history works in cycles. And unfortunately, we're in a real dead zone politically right now. We've had better times, in fact, when the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, EPA were founded in the early 70s, there was much more focus in Washington and governments around the world to addressing some of these issues, and they were better at it. That happened to be a moment. Now we're in a moment. But we need to collectively, as a civilization and as a society, figure this out. And everybody has to, we all have to play our part, but we also need leadership, which is really lacking right now, at least in the, in governments. It's here in New York during Climate Week. There's a lot of leaders, and that's just wonderful. But we all have to kind of get on the same page too, which we can talk about more if you want to. But there's a partisan divide that's causing an issue with this too. But these are always. I love to study humans because we will never have a perfect time. So we have to deal with what we have here. But anyway, that's a bigger kind of macro, at least philosophical take on that question.
Thank you, David. Honestly, it's very insightful, something that we can, as individuals and we as a society, can do. We'll be back in a moment after a word from Accutron.
Great.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Discover the new SpaceView Evolution Timepiece Collection, a true design evolution of the original Accutron SpaceView 2020, thanks to a new dial for an entirely new look. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover the many timeless faces of Accutron. Time just changed again.
We're back to the Accutron show with David Ewing Duncan, and we're so excited to have you here with your new book. I'd love to ask you, how does this connect to your previous book, which was also really timely and fascinating?
Well, again, I feel very lucky as a journalist, as a storyteller, to be able to kind of have a journey. And each of the books, each of the projects kind of, in my mind, seem like they make sense. But the last book was on robots. So the current book is on the microbiome of the planet. They do seem a little bit different, but I think one of the things that connects them, and much of what I do, is they involve this issue of technology versus how we absorb these technologies. I mean, we as a species are extraordinary in how we can make things and create things. And we also have a propensity to learn from our mistakes, which is a kind of an evolved trait that's given us our civilization in a way. But there's also, have we learned enough? How can we apply this? And how can we take these technologies, which tend to be basically neutral until they're used, and they can be used for good or bad. I mean, it's almost every technology. I mean, you go back to fire, the discovery of fire. I'm sure there were like pro-fire people and anti-fire people.
True.
And there's probably a partisan divide in the village. Like, we can cook meat, we can stay up at night and draw cave paintings.
It could destroy everything.
It's going to kill us all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is not a new debate. So that's what links up a lot of my work, and, trying to reframe that story, which is a never-ending story and an ancient story, really. So the last book was called Talking to Robots, and it really came out of, I'm mostly a life science writer, but as AI has moved into everything, I mean, one really important area it's moving into is life sciences. And, every biological organism, especially humans, are incredibly complicated. And so we need these tools, these computers and other things to help us make sense of all the data. So, but that got me thinking, of course, to, AI. And the book came out 4 years ago. The paperback just came out last year. But we're now, buzzing again about ChatGPT and some new, which I sort of predict or talk about in the book. I wasn't the only one, but it did happen faster than anybody thought it would. But that book, it's part fiction and part nonfiction, so it's kind of an experiment. And it's 24 robots. There's like a journalism bot. There's an intimacy bot. There's a teddy bear bot for kids. There's, any number of other bots, DocBot, Warrior Bot, which is about automated warfare. And so each of the chapters are kind of like short stories, and they're all told from the future by a narrator who knows how things turned out.
Oh, wow.
So he's talking to us in the present. So the fictional part of the story is in the future, and the nonfiction part is what he's telling us, and how I describe our present day is all nonfiction. But one of the things that I was trying to really work on with that book is we don't know what the future is going to be. I mean, it could be almost anything. We can imagine it could be really horrible or it could be really great. So that's what I did in the book. Some of the futures are really wonderful. We overcome, whatever difficulties we were having. I mean, everybody in the robot that took my job chapter, everybody is fired, including the head of Google and Apple and everything. And we decide we don't like that. And so we go back to the Google guys go back to their garages, and they build a new kind of AI that doesn't, destroy jobs. So anyway, that was fun. And it really, the point of that was, though, that we can imagine different futures, and that allows us to be able to shape, how things go. I mean, it doesn't prevent like pandemics coming out of nowhere, but it helps us get through these problems. And I think it does. I mean, hopefully anyway, you're imagining a really positive future, and we can make that happen.
A lot of magazines have come out and said that the only AI assistants that their publications and their writers use are Grammarly as a guide for grammar, and they are avoiding the use of ChatGPT.
Yes.
How do you feel about the idea of journalists or even writers in general utilizing AI assistants or AI writing tools?
Well, so ChatGPT right now, I'm not that worried about as a creative writer because it's not ready.
Agreed.
And we are not in the final wave. I mean, technology works in waves. And you wanted, if you're like, say, an investor, you wanted to be there when Google came, not the 6 or 7 waves before that. We don't even remember those companies. And ChatGPT is the same thing. This is maybe an early wave. I mean, I am actually more worried right now, and I wrote about this in the book, with robots and AI being dumb and stupid than I am about it being like, Terminator going to take over the world.
Yes.
And because right now you have to program literally every possible scenario into, and like there was the Boeing 737, was it MAX 8 that crashed? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, that was one of the most sophisticated robots ever built in AI systems. It crashed because of one small data input that any human, and in fact, the pilots were desperately trying to right the plane. It was telling the plane it had to dive. And that was inaccurate. And so you lost the plane. And that's a kind of horrible and tragic example. But, in other words, the big danger now is using these things that aren't quite ready. Some of it is, but I'm also very optimistic. I mean, especially in biology. I mean, again, we can't understand the human body and move to the next level of, say, predictive medicine, and until we learn to integrate genetics and all these other microbiome, all these other factors. And we need AI for that. But even obviously, I'd say even in medicine, but there's some serious ethical potential issues. And the fact that they're scraping data from the internet to teach, I mean, would you want to teach your kids from everything on the internet?
No.
Okay, so I'm not sure that's a great idea. I agree. And I think we'll refine that. But so I'm not that worried about it other than its misuse right now. And, like every other writer, I hate to admit this, but I ask it to write about, in my style, like David Ewing Duncan. I was going to see if it even knew me, but it did because I'm on the internet. And it was so weird reading something. And it was not my, it's only really kind of weirdly.
Superficially.
Yeah, superficially. And it also got facts wrong.
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting to me because as we grapple with the enormous potential of these kinds of technologies, I think it makes us also have to articulate what our values are, right? When we're outsourcing value judgments to a system, but we haven't agreed amongst ourselves what those values should be. So even with driverless cars, I mean, it raised wonderful questions, I felt, in the decision making that we all take for granted on a day-to-day basis. Who is more expendable, a grandmother or a kid? Like those kinds of terrible questions, but questions that we are all asking ourselves every day.
No, it's totally true. And, this is. So I lived in Silicon Valley. I mean, or at least in San Francisco, but I was kind of covering Silicon Valley for many years in California. And, there was an idea there that somehow if you made some brilliant innovation technology, you push the button and it would do better than we would as humans. Okay, I still have friends out there who believe that AI should be running the government, for instance. I mean, in pretty much anything. And, it's obviously a techno-optimism, but I'm sorry, but no. I mean, because it's humans that are designing this, okay? And we don't even, like you say, Indrani, I mean, we don't know the answers to these. I mean, and it changes too. I mean, as time goes on. I mean, would we have had rules around diversity from 100 years ago? No. And, we all know that there are biases written into the fundamental programming of AI. For instance, I mean, there's lots of other issues. And I don't think we'll ever completely work that out, but back in the 50s when they came up with the term artificial intelligence, AI also meant, in fact, more people thought of AI as meaning augmented intelligence than artificial intelligence. And there was literally a meeting at Dartmouth College in 1954 where these terms, Marvin Minsky was there and others, kind of famous people at that time. And I'm all for augmented intelligence. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that machines do better than we will ever do. But there are a lot of things we do better than any machine we can ever conceive of. And the idea of trying to replicate the human brain seems odd to me. And so I want the doctor who, maybe has something in his ear, and as I'm describing, he doesn't have to sit there at a keyboard and look up stuff, which, so many of them do now when you go in for your checkup. There's an AI that's kind of listening in and, kind of giving him, what he needs to know, or she. And that is what I'm hoping happens. And, driverless cars, I don't know, they're probably inevitable in some ways, but I would like to try them anyway on, like interstates where you have to go, like a truck goes from one city to another or something like that. They're still a little weird. I don't know if have you ridden in one?
I've seen them. But,
I mean, I haven't been,
I've been in a hands-free Tesla before where my friend was putting on his tie and the car was driving us to SpaceX at the time. That's true. That's all true.
I have a friend too who actually, he knows Elon Musk and he got a very early one, and he was taking us out in Boston driving around, and it was not, I think it's better than now. But I mean, you go, look at this, I'm not holding it, and we were like about to run into the car ahead of us, but I think it's better than that now.
I'm curious, as a fellow writer, have you had a best writing experience when you were in it, when you knew you were writing something that you were so moved, or you were in flow state and you were inspired and you thought you could change the world even?
Well, change the world, I had that. But in terms of the flow state, lots of times. I mean, I guess when you're a professional writer, right, or filmmaker or whatever, I mean, you have to kind of learn how to optimize that. And I wrote a piece for Vanity Fair last year on psychedelics and writing. And I got long haul COVID. I couldn't write. And I ended up getting rescued by psychedelics. And the piece is called Stolen Words, COVID, Ketamine, and Me. And I addressed that question because it's always been fascinating to me. There is a voice that's sort of, I don't know if this happens to you guys, but when you're really in the zone, it's almost like somebody is telling you the story, and maybe it's in your subconscious, or maybe somebody is telling you the story. I don't know, especially fiction. And I've had fiction writers. I'm writing my first novel right now, so this is an experience for me. It's a little different than nonfiction, but I once had Gordon Parks, the famous photographer, who was also an amazing writer, and he was a friend of my family's, and I used to stay with him in New York when I was in college, and he was writing one of his novels, and he was telling me, I'm trying to kill off this character, but she won't die. She needs to die for the story, but she's not. And I said, what are you talking about, Gordon? And he said, and that's when he told me, he said, I'm not writing the story. Something is telling me this story. My characters come to life. And so, I mean, that's, and what happened when I had that go away was horrible. And it threw me into a depression, actually, which is, the psychedelics help with a lot. And so, it's a magical thing that can go away fairly easily. But in terms of the other part of the question, I guess we could tell stories to ourselves or our friends, but when you actually, that's your job to do, especially as a journalist or documentary filmmaker or whatever, I don't think you're doing it to try to affect change. You're trying to send a message.
Yes.
And, again, my mother was, an activist. And, I watched her being, heckled and yelled at. And, being an environmentalist in Kansas, where I grew up in the 60s, was not the most popular thing, or the 70s. But she got the message out. And, I think that's, when you hit that moment, and, the microbiome of the planet, this new book, it has been incredibly gratifying just this week, because people are hearing about it, and here in Climate Week, people want to hear about it. And I'm being asked to speak here and there and, do different things. I mean, literally like people, hey, could you come to our meeting in 2 hours? And, that's wonderful as a writer. That's why, I guess that's why you do it.
Can I ask you a question about putting all this together, the microbiome and that voice, the spiritual essence, or whatever we want to call it. I'm very curious because I'm spending time in the Amazon with the indigenous people and talking about this mycelium, that everything is alive, everything is imbued with intentionality in some interesting ways. And I'm very curious of your thoughts. Does the microbiome have some kind of almost a planet governing essence?
Well, I suggest in the book that it might be a superorganism and a superintelligence. I mean, there's some biologists that believe that as much as we think we have free will and that, I could answer a question one way or the other, that all of this is sort of determined by our biology and the microbiome and other physical forces at work. So the microbiome is the ultimate expression of that. I mean, it literally is, they used to say the butterfly flapping its wing. I used to call it Peking, but now we call it Beijing. It's going to affect the weather in Colorado or something like that. I mean, the microbiome is the same way, but it's tiny, and every little element of that. And at the end of the book, get a little philosophical about we have an equilibrium that supports the ecosystem that supports us. And, with the second law of thermodynamics, entropy is supposed to happen, where actually things are supposed to break down. But the DNA on this planet, which is mostly microbes, for 4 billion years has managed to keep an equilibrium that has supported not only life, complex life, getting more and more. That's not supposed to happen. So that equilibrium, that equilibrium is what we're trying to maintain, because the microbiome, it can move to a different equilibrium. It will survive. I mean, but we may not. And that's the central message, really, of the book, is that this ecosystem, not only is our planet delicate, as the natural world, but this equilibrium that supports our ecosystem. I mean, we can't live in a world, with a methane atmosphere. I mean, there are many other extremes, or even, we get too far out of this equilibrium, the safe zone, and we can't survive. And so anyway, that's kind of a bigger, just philosophical message.
David, honestly, thank you. I hope everyone picks up a copy of your new book, The Voyage of Sorcerer 2, out now. Thank you for being such an enlightening guest here on the Accutron Show.
I appreciate that. Thank you for great questions.
Wonderful to see you.
Until next time.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. Remember to check out our special edition Accutron products in collaboration with La Paulina Cigars, Estabrook Pens, Aceline Publishing, and Stave Puzzles. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time. This is Bill McCuddy.